It takes a particular kind of institutional arrogance to declare itself the national arbiter of truth and then quietly edit mistakes without telling anyone. Welcome to the BBC in 2025, not just our national broadcaster, but our uninvited national fact checker, prosecutor, and judge. At the centre of this week's controversy is Question Time in Hull, and Fiona Bruce and a confused row about climate science, about net zero, and beneath that, with Richard Tice, and beneath that, there's something far more troubling: the BBC's unwillingness to admit error and its increasing reliance on a deeply flawed fact-checking unit known as BBC Verify. Now, I have some gripes myself with the BBC because I've called the BBC out at least on one occasion and written to them and spoken to them about their use of reportage, their use of stories which have been already put up by other reporters risking their lives, and then they send someone else and repeat exactly the same story and put it out as if it's new, without any reference to the people who'd already done it. More than that, I was told that they that in order to get the story, they went to the Ukrainian authorities and said, "We want to do a story like this," and showed the original. It's really shocking that they don't address these serious issues, and they're serious because the BBC is increasingly taking a rather grand attitude to its reporting, and it's getting it wrong. It's getting it wrong. You can't be grand and erroneous. And here's what happened on Thursday. Reform UK's Richard Tice, fresh off his party's local election surge, was on Question Time. And he stated that human activity contributes around 3 to 4% of total global carbon dioxide emissions. And Fiona Bruce, citing NASA via BBC Verify, corrected him live. No, it's closer to a third. A heated moment, but then something curious happened. The exchange, a central moment in the debate, vanished from the broadcast version. No on-air correction, no note in the iPlayer archive, just silence, a statistical sleight of hand followed by a disappearing act. And when asked, the BBC replied that the two statistics were compared, which were not directly comparable. But they stood by the statistic from NASA. They blamed the lack of context, not themselves. Now, let's be clear, whether the correct percentage is 3% or 30% or something more nuanced depends heavily on how one frames the question. Absolute atmospheric CO2 versus annual human contributions versus greenhouse gas forcing. But what's not acceptable is pretending the error didn't happen and editing it out without disclosure. There was an audience there that saw the exchange. This wasn't just about climate science. This was about trust. And BBC Verify, we're told, was created to explain complex stories in the pursuit of truth. Instead, it increasingly serves as a PR bulwark, an armoured division in the BBC's defensive war against its own credibility crisis. And when Verify falters, as it has before, from misrepresenting on asylum statistics to quoting a partisan tax activist as independent, the corrections are rare, late, or buried. Franz Unsworth, the BBC's former head of news, has already warned us. What does it say about the rest of the journalism if you need a special unit to find the truth? Indeed, does the BBC expect us to believe that its flagship programmes are otherwise exempt from verification? Or worse, is BBC Verify simply a badge of technocratic virtue, a truth label stamped on whatever the BBC wishes to broadcast, an imprimatur? At a cost of 3.3 million and a staff of 61, one could be forgiven for expecting a little more rigour and a little less institutional ego. And the latest blunder highlights a deeper rot. The BBC increasingly sees criticism not as an opportunity for correction, but as a threat to its authority. And the phrase, "we edited for clarity," is now code for "we got caught and we're hoping you didn't notice." But people are noticing. Trust in the BBC, especially among younger audiences and political minorities, is eroding, and with good reason. And when a fact-checking unit becomes a propaganda shield, when transparency is sacrificed for narrative control, the BBC begins to resemble not a beacon of public service, but an ivory tower with a broken intercom. The problem is not that the BBC made a mistake. Anyone can make a mistake. Any institution can make a mistake. All institutions do. The problem is that the BBC refuses to own it. Quiet edits, no apology, no self-reflection, in front of an audience. It doesn't matter whether the show goes out live or whether the show goes out a few minutes later after an edit. In a world awash with misinformation, the BBC should be a compass, not a weather vane. It should enable scrutiny. It should embrace scrutiny, not evade it. And if it cannot distinguish between correction and concealment, then perhaps it's not BBC Verify we need, it's BBC Humility or BBC Humanity. Or just, wouldn't BBC be okay? Surely everyone in the BBC is committed to verifying as much as they can. What does BBC Verify actually do? What does it mean? How does it justify employing 61 extra people to do what? To check what journalists are already doing. That seems nonsensical. An entire department set up to check on what people are already doing. And again and again, it fails.